When my wife returned from her work trip with unexpected news, my world turned upside down. The joy of hearing she was pregnant quickly gave way to suspicion when I realized the dates didn't add up. I couldn't confront her, so I vanished from her life until the truth unraveled everything in a way I never imagined. Ethan, 34, is the kind of person who lives by logic and order, a skilled software developer who thrives on solving problems and planning for the future. His wife, Sophia, 31, is almost his opposite. As a marketing executive, she's ambitious, outgoing, and often on the go for work. They've been married for 5 years. And while their love is undeniable, the pressures of Sophia's demanding career have sometimes created tension in their relationship. Lately, Ethan has been longing for more stability, a family to ground them both. He's hinted at starting a family several times, and although Sophia has always responded with a nervous laugh or a not yet, he figured it was just her way of postponing the conversation. When Sophia returned from her latest work trip with an announcement that she was pregnant, Ethan thought all his dreams were coming true. The excitement in her eyes and the way she said, "We're having a baby," felt like a moment straight out of a movie. But as much as Ethan wanted to celebrate, a quiet doubt started gnawing at the back of his mind. It started with Sophia walking through the door, practically glowing. She dropped her bag and hugged Ethan with an energy he hadn't felt in months. "I have the most amazing news," she exclaimed. Ethan naturally leaned in, his heart pounding in anticipation. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. For a moment, Ethan was speechless. His thoughts were a whirlwind of joy, disbelief, and excitement. He pulled her into a tight embrace, whispering, "That's incredible, Sophia." But as they sat down to talk about the baby, Ethan's mind began doing what it always did, analyzing. He started counting back to the last time they'd been intimate, and something didn't add up. The timeline didn't match, not even close. He didn't say anything then, not wanting to ruin what should have been a joyful moment. Instead, he smiled, nodded, and listened as Sophia excitedly talked about doctor's appointments and baby names. But that night, as Sophia fell asleep with a hand resting on her stomach, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The questions he didn't want to ask himself began to surface. Could it be someone else's? What really happened on that work trip? Those doubts would soon grow too large to ignore. As the days passed, Ethan couldn't stop replaying the timeline in his mind. He did the math over and over, and no matter how he stretched the numbers, it just didn't fit. They hadn't been intimate during the crucial weeks when conception must have occurred. His unease grew with every passing moment, and soon he began noticing things about Sophia that he'd never paid attention to before. She seemed distracted, like her usual energy had shifted into overdrive. Whenever he tried to casually ask her about her work trip, she gave vague answers or quickly changed the subject. Her phone was another thing. Normally, she left it lying around without a care. But now, it was always face down, and she'd glance at it nervously when notifications popped up. Was she hiding something, or was he just overthinking? Ethan began to spiral, consumed by his doubts. He wanted to believe Sophia, he really did. But every time he looked at her, he couldn't help but wonder if there was a secret she wasn't telling him. He started pulling back emotionally, retreating into his own thoughts and shutting her out little by little. What he didn't realize was that this silence was already starting to tear them apart. Ethan's inner turmoil soon manifested in his actions. It started with shorter conversations and avoiding eye contact. Then he began staying later at work, claiming he had deadlines to meet. When in reality, he was sitting in his car in the parking lot, staring into space, trying to make sense of his feelings. At home, he couldn't bring himself to sleep next to Sophia. "I'm too tired to stay comfortable," he'd mutter, grabbing a pillow and heading for the couch. Sophia tried to brush it off at first, thinking it was just stress or fatigue, but the emotional distance between them grew wider by the day. Then came the moment Ethan couldn't take it anymore. One morning, while Sophia was at work, he packed a bag, left a vague note on the kitchen counter, and walked out the door. The note read, "I need some time to think. Don't call me." He turned off his phone and checked into a small, nondescript apartment on the other side of town. He told no one where he was, not Sophia, not his friends, not even his family. For the first time in his life, Ethan ghosted someone he loved. And for all the space he now had, his thoughts didn't bring him peace. They only became louder, and soon, the guilt of his silence began to clash with the fury of his doubts. He wondered if leaving was the right choice, or if he was running away from a truth he wasn't ready to face. When Sophia came home that evening, she immediately knew something was wrong. The apartment felt emptier than usual. At first, she thought Ethan might still be at work, but when she noticed his clothes missing from the closet and the cryptic note on the counter, her stomach dropped. She called him immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. She texted him over and over, trying to understand what had happened. "Ethan, where are you? What's going on?" she wrote. But hours turned into days, and her messages remained unanswered. Sophia was beside herself with confusion and worry. She reached out to his friends and even called his workplace, but no one could tell her where he was. "Is he okay? Did something happen to him?" she asked repeatedly. But deep down, Sophia suspected that Ethan's sudden disappearance had something to do with her pregnancy. The silence was crushing. Sophia started replaying every moment of the past few weeks, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. Was it something she said? Something she did? She thought about telling him what had happened on her work trip, but fear held her back. What if he didn't believe her? What if this was the end of their marriage? Sophia's friends rallied around her, calling Ethan's behavior cruel and unfair. "He owes you an explanation," one of them said angrily, but Sophia couldn't bring herself to be angry. She was too hurt, too scared, and too consumed by the fear that her marriage was falling apart and that it might be her fault. A week later, Ethan was sitting in his small, empty apartment, his mind racing as usual, when an email notification popped up on his laptop. He almost ignored it, but the subject line caught his attention: "You need to know the truth." Curious and slightly anxious, he opened the email. Inside were a few attached photos and a short, cryptic message: "She's been lying to you." The photos showed Sophia at what appeared to be a restaurant. She was laughing and sitting across from a man Ethan didn't recognize. The two of them looked close, sharing smiles and leaning in toward each other. One photo showed the man reaching across the table as if to touch her hand. Ethan's heart sank. He stared at the pictures for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of them. The sender's identity was hidden, leaving him with more questions than answers. Who is this guy? Is this the father of the baby? Ethan thought, his anger bubbling to the surface. He printed the photos, grabbed his car keys, and drove straight to his old apartment. If Sophia wasn't going to tell him the truth, he was going to confront her head-on. The drive was a blur of rage and heartbreak. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. When he arrived and saw Sophia's surprised face at the door, he didn't even let her speak. He threw the photos on the table and demanded, "Who is he? And why are you lying to me?" Sophia's expression shifted from shock to sadness. Her lips trembled, but she didn't immediately respond. Ethan braced himself for the truth he thought he was about to hear, but what she told him next was something he never expected. The silence that followed Ethan's outburst felt suffocating. Sophia's eyes darted from the photos on the table to Ethan's face, and then she looked away, her hands trembling. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "it's not what you think." Ethan's frustration boiled over. "Not what I think? Then explain these." He pointed to the photos, his voice shaking. "You're laughing with this guy," leaning into him. "And the dates don't add up, Sophia. You told me you were pregnant, but we both know I couldn't have been there at the right time. So tell me the truth, who is he?" Tears streamed down Sophia's face, but she didn't defend herself immediately. Instead, she sank into the nearest chair, covering her face with her hands. "I was going to tell you," she finally said. "I just didn't know how. I was so scared you'd hate me." "Tell me what," Ethan snapped, his patience hanging by a thread. Sophia took a deep, shaky breath. "During the work trip, there was a party. I wasn't feeling great, but everyone insisted I join. I thought I'd just have one drink and leave," but her voice broke and she wiped at her tears. "Someone spiked my drink, Ethan. I don't remember much of that night. I woke up in my hotel room, disoriented, with no memory of what happened." Ethan's anger faltered for a moment, replaced by confusion. "What are you saying?" "I didn't know what to do. I was terrified. I didn't even want to believe it myself. And then, weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. I was praying it was yours, but I couldn't face the possibility that it wasn't. I didn't know how to tell you." Ethan stared at her, his emotions a tangled mess of disbelief, anger, and sympathy. Part of him wanted to believe her, to comfort her, but another part of him couldn't ignore the seed of doubt that had already been planted. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice softer but still edged with frustration. "I didn't want to lose you," she whispered. The weight of Sophia's words hung heavy in the air, and Ethan didn't know what to say. He sat down across from her, his head in his hands, trying to process everything. "So you're telling me you don't know who the father is?" he finally asked. Sophia nodded hesitantly. "I don't. I swear, Ethan, I didn't cheat on you. I would never betray you like that. What happened to me? It wasn't my choice." Ethan felt his chest tighten. If what she was saying was true, then she had been a victim. The thought made his stomach churn. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the photos or the email. "What about this guy?" he asked, pointing to the man in the pictures. Sophia glanced at the photos and shook her head. "That's Peter. He's a colleague. We had dinner with the team after the conference. That's all. Whoever sent you those pictures must have taken them out of context." Ethan wanted to believe her, but the scars of his doubt ran deep. "You're asking me to trust you after everything. Do you have any idea what it's been like for me? The timeline didn't add up, and then I see these photos. How was I supposed to feel?" Sophia reached across the table, her eyes pleading. "I understand why you're hurt, Ethan, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove the truth to you. We can take a paternity test if that's what you need. I just need you to believe me when I say I love you. I didn't choose for this to happen." Ethan looked at her, his heart torn between the woman he loved and the doubts that had consumed him. "We'll take the test," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "But I can't promise anything beyond that." The room fell silent, the tension between them palpable. For the first time in days, Ethan felt like they were on the brink of some kind of resolution. But whether it would bring them closer together or tear them apart for good, he couldn't yet tell. The decision to take a paternity test felt like a lifeline and a storm. Ethan and Sophia booked an appointment at a clinic, the atmosphere between them tense and unspoken. Ethan couldn't look Sophia in the eye as they sat in the waiting room, the weight of their fractured relationship pressing down on both of them. When the technician explained the process, Sophia's voice trembled as she asked, "How long until we get the results?" "2 weeks, the technician said. 2 weeks that felt like an eternity. During that time, their lives became a painful limbo. Ethan stayed in the guest room, unable to bring himself to share the same bed as Sophia. Conversations were sparse, mostly revolving around mundane logistics like bills or groceries. Yet there were moments when Sophia tried to reach out to remind him of the bond they once shared. "Ethan, do you remember our first trip to the mountains?" she asked one evening, her voice soft. "How we got lost on that hiking trail and laughed for hours?" Ethan nodded but didn't respond. He couldn't bring himself to reminisce when the weight of the unknown hung over them. As the days passed, Sophia became more withdrawn. Ethan caught her crying in the kitchen once, but she quickly wiped her tears and pretended she was fine. He hated seeing her like that, but his own anger and confusion kept him from offering comfort. When the results finally arrived, the envelope sat on the counter like a ticking time bomb. Neither of them moved to open it. "Do you want to do it together?" Sophia asked, her voice shaking. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. They opened it together, the words on the paper staring back at them like a final judgment. The results confirmed what Ethan had secretly feared but hoped against. He wasn't the father. The words on the paper hit him like a punch to the gut. For a moment, the room felt like it was spinning. Sophia stared at the results in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know. I prayed it would be you. I wanted it to be you." Ethan's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal, and a pang of sympathy he didn't want to feel. "So what now, Sophia?" he asked, his voice cold. "What happens next?" Sophia looked at him, desperation in her eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, Ethan. I'll get counseling. I'll report what happened on the trip. I don't want to lose you." Ethan stood, unable to stay in the room any longer. "I need time," he said firmly, "to figure out what I want, to figure out if I can even move past this." For weeks, Ethan grappled with his emotions. He sought advice from friends, talked to a therapist, and spent hours alone, reflecting on their relationship. He couldn't ignore the pain Sophia had endured, but he also couldn't deny the damage it had done to their marriage. Eventually, Ethan met with Sophia to talk. "I don't hate you," he said, his voice steady. "But I don't know if I can be the man you need me to be after this. Maybe someday, but not now." Sophia nodded, tears falling. "I understand. I'll always love you, Ethan." The story ended not with a clear resolution, but with a bittersweet parting. Ethan and Sophia both took steps toward healing, separately, hoping to find peace in their own ways. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more captivating content. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next video.